Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Andrew Doughty, General Manager, MILSATCOM Division at the Aerospace Corporation, to the stage.
Thank you. I hope everybody's had a great lunch, and I hope everybody's had a great opportunity to participate in the technical committees and activities throughout the week. It's been a wonderful opportunity for all of us to see folks we haven't seen in a while, and an opportunity to learn things that we don't normally have the opportunity to hear about. The Aerospace Corporation is proud to sponsor the lunch today and to be a sponsor of the MILCOM 2018 conference. I'd like to congratulate the IEEE and AFCEA for putting on this forum this week. They've done a tremendous job. It's now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for the panel, which will conclude the MILCOM 2018 plenary program, Mr. Jay Santee. Mr. Santee is the Vice President of the Strategic Space Operations in Aerospace's Defense Systems Group. He oversees the corporation's support to the Air Force's space warfighting construct, which combines transformational and warfighting-focused command initiatives to maintain space superiority in the 21st century. He is retired in 2015 as a Major General for the United States Air Force, following a distinguished 33-year career. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Santee and the panel.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll just start with a few words about myself. Sunday was a significant day in my life. As my mother calls it, it was the 60th anniversary of my birthing day. And at the same time, it happened to be my one-year anniversary with aerospace. And that was a significant moment for me as I look back on the year and how much we've been able to accomplish collectively as a space enterprise in leading the necessary change to outpace the threat. I have 5 more years with aerospace. There's a lot more to lead, and I look forward to that and working with all of you to lead the necessary change to outpace the threat. Today, I'm pleased to be sharing the stage with a distinguished group of Space and Missile Systems Center MILSATCOM program managers. Between them, there's over 100 years of experience in equipping the world's finest joint space force. They collectively procure and sustain satellites and ground equipment for joint warfighters and the President. Our nation depends on their leadership, vision, and procurement acumen to deter, fight, and win wars. As one warfighting general, the commander of the United States Forces Korea, recently said, "Bandwidth is more important than bullets." And these are the program managers who ensure our bandwidth outpaces their bullets. Today, our format will be for me to introduce each panel member and allow them to provide their perspectives and thoughts as they relate to resilience, security, agility, innovation, or really anything they want to talk about. And then, after each of them has had a chance to talk, we'll open the floor up to questions from everyone. So please, as we're going through this, if you have questions for the panel members, please start to send them in. If you don't, then you'll get to hear more of me, and you certainly don't want to do that. And now they don't know I'm going to play jump ball with them. Does anybody want to go first? And I'll introduce you. If not, it's going to go to Steve Hayden then. Steve is the Chief Engineer and Deputy Program Manager for the Wideband Global SATCOM Division, where he's responsible for the acquisition and technical performance of the wide WGS satellites. Lieutenant Hayden started his Air Force career at Hill Air Force Base and had assignments in test, intelligence, and program acquisition. He served at the MAGCOM level and in several SMC program offices before assuming his current position. Steve, we're anxious to hear your comments.
I think he said my opening comments, but yeah, I've been working on WGS now for about 10 years after I retired from the Air Force. I love the program. It's been great to work on a program that it's kind of been what I would, I've worked on several programs before that, a little bit broader base, but this one's kind of, it has been very tight on requirements, and we've been able to deliver a lot of product, and we've been successful at launching. I got there in WGS-2, and we're now poised to launch WGS-10 here in January. So, been really a great, I guess, decade now of support on WGS. I enjoy the program. We've, in some of the areas as far as what he was talking about, resiliency, innovation, et cetera. We've gone from 3 different contracts, and we've done some innovation over the years that, even with a kind of commercial-based program, we've still managed to take advantage of technology development as we've gone along. So even the payload, we've increased the bandwidth of the payload over time. We've provided, and we're doing an anti-jam upgrade to the ground system so that can provide some, take advantage of some of the features that the satellite offers to further enhance kind of the resiliency of the overall constellation. So it's a nice little program, but it's been great to kind of work on the development as we've gone along, and also just being able to deliver product to the warfighter over the years. So turn my time back over.
All right, thank you, Steve. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Tim McIntyre. He's the MILSATCOM Production Support Manager and Chief of MILSATCOM Operations Support and Sustainment Division at Peterson. We're escaping the snow out there today by being here. In these roles, Tim is responsible for all product support and planning and execution of MILSATCOM satellites and worldwide command and control infrastructure. Prior to this assignment, Tim served in a variety of roles as an Air Force officer. He's a graduate of the University of Notre Dame and the Air Force School of Institute of Technology. Please welcome Tim.
Thank you, sir. So my perspective, one, it's good to be an SMC employee but get to live in Colorado Springs. But we have different challenges in the op support and sustainment end of the business. We're not necessarily changing or chasing large technical problems. Ours is a challenge of speed and responsiveness to system outages and being able to restore those things quickly. So while we're not dealing with some of the large technical problems, we're dealing with money that's 1 year money, 3,400 money, and so we have to have contracts that are in place that are flexible and responsive. So there are some things in sustainment that are known and fixed. Sometimes we refer to as the standing army, X number of people going out to Schriever Air Force Base each day and helping the 4th Space Operations Squadron with their operations. But then there's also the known unknowns. And so we're looking at, in our contract strategies, trying to come up with more flexible contract vehicles like IDIQ type contracts so that we can build in the scope for the work, but that we don't have to always go back to legal and contracting to get a determination on that scope. So as we are learning in our contract strategies, we're trying to come up with flexibility. And then the other thing that we're looking at is how do we incentivize contractor performance? And so if it was just a pure turnkey operation that contractor X came in and I could just measure system availability, that'd be great. But generally we have government operators, other suppliers that are providing key support to that system. So that's the challenge where we need to look at what is the kind of behavior that we want to incentivize our various product support providers. And then finally, the only other thing that I'd like to mention is that we do also come up with certain relationships between our industry partners and our government depot partners. So there is Title 10 law that says that 50% of depot level workload has to go to our government depots. So coming up with ways on how we bring our government depots into the fold with industry through things like public-private partnerships so that we can comply with the legislation that Congress has given us to get some of that workload to our organic depots. So, sir, that's all I had for opening.
All right, thank you, Tim. Next, we have Colonel Paul Mueller. He's the material leader for Advanced Extremely High Frequency Space Segment Branch, Space and Missile Systems Center, where he directs space vehicle design, production, integration, and test of the $14 billion constellation delivering nuclear command and control to the President of the United States. Paul entered the Air Force in 2001 as an ROTC distinguished graduate from Worcester Polytechnical Institute. Throughout his career, he served in a variety of positions in the lab, center, headquarters, Air Force levels, and he deployed to Afghanistan, where he led a joint U.S.-Afghan team executing a high-priority partnership building capacity effort. So welcome, and we're anxious to hear from you.
Thank you. I'm still riding high off the successful launch of AHF4 on October 17th. So hopefully you were fortunate enough to either see that in person or stream it on one of the various streaming websites. You probably had a better view than me a few miles away in Titusville. I said go and took off my headset and then ran outside and watched the thing that we've been working on so hard get up into space. But happy to say that that went very successfully, and it's continuing to do so. So had to shift back from the launch mindset into talking about this stuff. I think what's a little bit unique about AHF is we're pretty far through production right now. As I said, 4 just launched, 5 and 6 will launch in the next couple years. So we have limited opportunities to be hugely agile or innovative within the constraints of the program. So how do we adapt and respond within those constraints? I think it requires a very strong relationship and trust with the contractor, which we have. And we think about how we can creatively react inside the bounds of the contract, so we're not making too many contractual changes, but still getting a benefit to the warfighter and a benefit to the nation. So that's really where my focus has been over the last year in this position, is how do we respond to the changing environment with satellites that are mostly built and getting ready to launch, which is a unique challenge, but it's something that I think we've met, and happy to be here to talk about that today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Next, we have Ms. Shannon Pallone. She's the program manager for the $7 billion Protected Tactical SATCOM program. She began her career here at Space and Missile Systems Center as a presidential management fellow, and has held a variety of positions in the past decade. She's a graduate of Duke and the University of California at San Diego. Prior to joining the civil service, she worked in television and film development as an executive. She had worked for various nonprofits, and she also worked as a staff geologist for an environmental consulting firm. Quite a varied past, and brings all those perspectives and diversity to us today.
Thank you. I have had a really varied, twisty, windy career, but I found that the Air Force has been that perfect marriage of I can move around and do lots of different things without ever leaving the company, so to say. So it's been a really exciting last decade working with the Air Force. I've been with MILSATCOM for about 3 years now, 2.5 of those working the Protected Tactical SATCOM program. I inherited a fielding strategy that I think is really exciting. We started with our users. We started with the terminal segment and developing a prototype modem to say, can I just do a simple modem swap in the terminals and upgrade their capabilities to a new waveform? We moved from that onto the PTES program, which is upgrading the ground and using that waveform over WGS satellites. And then I get the last piece of that puzzle, which is the on-orbit capability, the protected tactical waveform fully processed on orbit. So it's been a really exciting time to see that mission area get birthed, start to grow, get momentum, see the 2 programs that came before mine really start to succeed, and then see all this happen at a time when there is an appetite for how do we work with industry, how do we take advantage of what's going on in the commercial market, how do we take a little bit more risk. And we've been given this really great problem set that says, can I take the confluence of all of those events happening together and leverage that to do something a little bit new and different? Can I get something to the user at a faster speed than I have in the past? Can I take some risk? Can I move this out there and allow industry to innovate? And will that have better results? And we're still at the very beginning of that, so I don't know where that's going to end up when we get to the end of it. But it's exciting to get to be able to take that journey and shape it through that journey and see if we can really field new capability to the warfighter in a more efficient manner. It's just, in 10 years, this is the most exciting time, I think, to work in space. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Next, we'll hear from Colonel Ken Smith. He is the material leader for the Enhanced Polar System branch here at SMC. He's responsible for developing payload, ground, gateway segments, and interfacing with air, ground, ship, and submarine warfighter terminals. EPS and EPSR deliver secure, jam-resistant communication service to combatant commanders to provide for strategic as well as tactical communications throughout all levels of conflict in the northern polar region. Prior to his assignment here, he completed a master's degree at the Naval War College, and his other assignments include serving on the Air Force Academy staff and in several SMC program offices on the U.S. SOCOM staff, and as well as being a space operator in the 4th Space Operations Squadron. I might add the second best wing in the Air Force. Ken.
Well, thank you, sir. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. And so I've been the material leader for Enhanced Polar System only since July, but I do have a MILSATCOM background, as Mr. Santee alluded to, in Force Ops. Certainly the best space operations squadron in Air Force Space Command, as General T can attest to. So during that time, I had the opportunity to be a satellite vehicle operator for the MILSTAR constellation, and also to work as a launch support officer, where I was trying to help get Force Ops ready and prepared from the operations side to bring on advanced EHF-1. So it's certainly, just really exciting to see, just launching 4, how far we've come with that as well. And so to be here now on the Enhanced Polar System and the recapitalization program is exciting in and of itself, but as Shannon alluded to, certainly such a good time to be in this role as well, with senior leadership buy-in to move faster, to do things differently. Part of which is driven by our near-peer competitors' recent advances in space, and us basically being compelled to move in this direction. But it's great to see that our senior leadership is on board and pushing that direction and is motivating us to do the same, and our folks to do the same. And so for the EPS recapitalization side, we're leveraging that currently with our partnership with Norway, and in which we're taking 2 of our US-built payloads and hosting them with our partners in Norway, using commercial practices, meeting a pretty aggressive launch date of December of 2022 is what we're planning to. So we're trying to do things differently in MILSATCOM and EPS, and so it's certainly an exciting time to be a part of the program, and just thanks for having us here today.
Thank you. And finally, last but not least, Colonel Jessica Wedington. She's the material commander of the Advanced Extremely High Frequency Ground segment, where she leads a team of over 150 civilian, military, and contractor personnel who manage the development of a $150 mission planning system for protected military satellite communications. She was born in Germany, earned her commission through OTS, and has served in a variety of assignments during her challenging Air Force career. We look forward to hearing your perspectives as the final speaker.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I started my career a little over 17 years ago here at LA Air Force Base, and although there were lots of twists and turns along the way, the one thing that was constant for me was ground systems. I've been on several different ground systems throughout my career, and found myself here in July of 2015 on another ground system with quite a unique mission, much different than any of the other ground systems that I had done before. Obviously, as many of you know, the AHF system is an extremely important mission for the nation. And so coming to this program and working on the mission planning system, because at the point that I came to the program, the command and control system had already transitioned to sustainment. So it's my job to ensure that the mission planning system for all of the AEHF users all over the world have a system that allows them to be able to communicate through the AEHF constellation. One thing that I have found in being here is that one of the most important things for this mission is collaboration. Not just collaboration with our industry partners, but also with our international partners. My team of captains and lieutenants and our aerospace team is responsible for the interactions that we have with our 3 mission international partners. So we spend a lot of time collaborating with them to ensure that they're also able to utilize the system that they've bought into. And then, of course, our users, as I said, we have users all over the world, not just here, obviously, in the United States, but in every country around the world. So it's extremely important that we provide this system for them. And as we transition to sustainment, to Mr. McIntyre's group, we intend to ensure that the users are continuing to get that quality software and that they're able to use the system without any hiccups in their ability to communicate when they need to.
All right, thank you. So we've now come to the question and answer period. I don't know if we've gotten any yet. I'm going to look back to Heather. Are we getting any in yet? Otherwise, you're going to hear more from me.
Sir, we have one question.
Okay.
On our new programs, when and why should we consider contractor ops and/or sustainment versus government?
Okay. Say it one more time. I didn't even understand
This is more
it. I'm not
directed
having to
to
answer it, so-
MCL, I think.
Okay.
But on our new programs, when and why should we consider contractor ops and/or sustainment versus government?
So when should we look to have organic versus, okay.
Yeah, so we did, a few years back, we went through an exercise looking at transitioning WGS operations out at Schriever to contractor ops. We certainly, the force ops today, has prime role in that, but back behind the scenes, we do have a lot of contractors supporting both aerospace and then Lockheed and Boeing personnel dependent on the system. So I think as we move more towards a focus on mission effects and bringing our military more into dealing with the warfighters and that sort of planning, I think there is more opportunity to look at the flying of the satellite to be more of a contractor operation than necessarily needing to have blue suits in the seat. I believe it'll always be a government person making the final calls, but that exercise for a number of reasons got delayed. A couple things went on there, but I think there's certainly opportunity to look at more contractor support in the operations of the satellite. Again, that would be one where I would look at to say, how do I make sure we incentivize the right behavior? Because in a lot of cases, it's the military that feeds the contractor world, and so we got to be concerned about everybody going out the door one day for retirement. So maybe we incentivize things like keeping an experience level at more like 7 or 8 years versus 15 years, so that we ensure that industry continues to bring in some new blood and that we're not going to, again, be left holding the bag when everyone decides to retire. So I think there's some challenges there to, again, incentivize the right behavior if we do go to more contractor operations.
All right, thank you. We were talking just during our lunch session about the fact that right now is a very interesting, you heard several of the panelists refer to this, an exciting time in space. I see two major trends that would have caused us to rethink our entire approach to how we architect and end up developing and procuring space systems. The first being, as we all know, that fall in launch costs and this proliferation of big LEO, and it would have caused us to rethink across the board, are there things we want to do differently about how we would approach procurements? And at about the same time, we had the entry of the threat from a couple of our near-peer adversaries that also would cause us to have to rethink how do we architect and think about largely going forward. It became more than just sort of that thought process, perhaps at the high-end war, but we were now going to need to be resilient all the way through war. So I have a couple questions with regards to those kind of things. How, and it's especially difficult when you can't start clean sheet. You all inherited something and have to work from that. So how have you, and this is open to anyone, how have you thought about your acquisition strategies and contracts to sort of bring more security back into your system with the threat in mind, particularly cyber threats or exfiltration of your information, as well as maybe direct attacks on your mission systems? How have you thought about that? Any thinking?
So I'll take first shot. Without going into too many specifics, as I mentioned before, AHF is pretty far through production right now, so there's not a lot of opportunities for us to change the design or the build of the satellites. But what we can do, and as we look forward to SMC 2.0, is take the lessons learned from AHF and our production and feed those back into the programs that are just getting started. So, if we've had a particular technical challenge or a particular contractual challenge, we can work with the relevant teams to outline those and then feed those back into programs like what Shannon's doing, getting something off the ground, and say, hey, you might want to think about this because this is a way that I felt particularly constrained by something that I inherited that was so far down the road. And I think a good example of something that, like that we're doing is looking into commonality across programs from one vendor, but ultimately can we turn that into commonality in programs across multiple vendors? It's interfaces, certain components, that sort of thing. So if there are changes that need to be made late in production, it's not that hard to swap out a box or swap out some other sort of capability, which is very difficult to do now.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I would say things we're really thinking about as we come forward with the next one is how do I break that problem down into the right components and the right pieces to say, you know, where do I need to own those boundaries? Where can I break down the problem in a way that does let me adapt and evolve and upgrade over time instead of having to start over from scratch on the entire thing? So it's been a lot of lessons learned back and forth across the programs.
So on the sustainment side, we do a lot of tech refreshes, and we try to look at when we do those tech refreshes, can we improve our, security posture? Sometimes in the past, if you try to turn on some of those features, it would crash the system. So just a simple obsolescence change might be able to let you introduce some more security and resiliency. And then the other is, as we've talked about here this week, the enterprise ground services. How are we going to take our legacy systems that are out there today and merge those on to the EGS framework? So we're doing a lot of work with that team to see, how are we going to take the current systems and with tech refreshes and upgrades that we do some things that meet those standards that they're laying out. So I think that's another way to get there from having what you have today and getting to a better, more robust architecture in the future.
So I'd also offer, on EPS, we're getting ready to go into OT&E for our heritage system, and as with all of our systems, we've undergone several what we call adversarial assessment events, where we've had red teams look at vulnerabilities and then give us out briefs on some of the things that they've found, and so those have certainly been good opportunities for us to learn and then share those lessons across as well. I think from a macro level too, one of the things that this makes me ask the question of, how are we looking at talent management at a higher level? How are we ensuring that we have the right people in place who are doing these adversarial assessments for us? And how can we attract the right talent and the right people with the cyber background and knowledge and skill set that we need to be able to keep up with and outpace our competitors? I think is something that we all have to look at.
From the ground perspective, we're implementing risk management framework, which was downward directed to us from the DoD. It helps us to secure our information systems and to integrate information security and risk management into our whole development lifecycle, as opposed to waiting until the end to try to implement cybersecurity as kind of its own thing. You want to make sure that it's throughout the life cycle of the system and not just its own separate thing. It allows us to translate RMF requirements as given to us by the DoD into deliverables, and it gives us as the program management team the ability to monitor kind of how the contractor is implementing those cyber and information security aspects into the program all along the way.
Okay, great answers. We talked there about security side of things for a minute. How about this innovative period that's going on with the commercial industry? How are you able to maybe alter your strategies and contracts to take advantage of innovative ideas that come out of industry without sort of breaking your current program and strategy? How do you onboard the new thinking, I guess?
WGS essentially came from a commercial-based system, so we've been over the period as we, from block 1 to block 2 to block 2 follow-on, we've essentially tried to take advantage of, not just parts obsolescence upgrade, but also look at enhancements that have come out of the contractor's commercial line to increase our operational flexibility or provide some user enhancements via the ground systems. So, on the Block 2 follow-on, we upgraded the channelizer, which took advantage of some latest technology and enhanced our, the amount of bandwidth we could put out. We don't deal much with the ground system in WGS anymore, but we've found that some of the features that we had on the latest that were inherent within WGS, we could make a ground upgrade, which helps with, kind of takes advantage of some of the features on the WGS so that you can work with, jammers or interferers that may come up in the operational environment. So be able to kind of look at that over the time frame, and we, like on Block 2 follow-on, we changed our operating model so that we could save some money on the production, but then plow it back into saving or into enhancements for both the ground and kind of the payload. So we've kind of taken advantage of that. Obviously, our contract is kind of our contract at this point.
I think there's some new authorizations through Congress that allow us to maybe get at things a little bit quicker, one of those being other transactional authority. And we recently used that method to get a prototype antenna structure for a new terminal that's coming. That the original plan was we were just going to go into the old equipment. Well, the old equipment has been out there for 25 years and is rusting away. So we needed to get at something fairly quickly. So we used OTA to bring on a small commercial firm, to basically build, essentially a fairly simple type structure. We from the time of the idea to getting a prototype at our facility in Colorado Springs was on the order of about 15 months. So I think, again, with the new mechanisms that Congress has authorized, and we've talked about the 804s, OTAs, et cetera, those are ways for us as program managers to try to get things fielded a lot quicker than we used to in the past.
And I'd piggyback on what you just said. We've heavily leveraged the Space Enterprise Consortium for the PTS program, and that's given us an amazing opportunity to reach out to a huge cross-section of the space industry, more than just the typical defense contractors, but also the non-traditional commercial small businesses. And it's been this fantastic opportunity for us to interact with those businesses and for them to interact with us and learn from each other, and be able to really widen that base and widen the opportunities for ideas to flow into the program. And that's been something that we've really enjoyed, we've really learned a lot from, and is letting us think about the problem differently.
I do, yes. As a very specific example for AHF ground, so as many of you probably know, the MILSTAR satellites have been flying for quite some time. Initially, their design life was 10 years. The first MILSTAR exceeded 24 years on orbit just this past summer. So I don't think we ever really anticipated that we would have this many satellites in the constellation all flying at the same time. And from the ground perspective, what we've done recently in one of our builds of software that we're doing right now is implemented a capability for the mission planners to be able to, despite the fact that we have a limit on the number of satellites that can be in the ring all at one time, since we're going to exceed that limit with the 6th AEHF vehicle once it gets on orbit, we've created an ability for the planners to actually be able to plan all 11 satellites separately, but not to have to wait for one of the satellites that's on orbit to be removed from the ring. So that was a very innovative solution that we teamed with our partner to come up with to ensure that the planners had the ability to do that ahead of time and not wait until the satellites were on orbit.
Great, that's a good example. Anyone else?
So I'll just add, kind of from an acquisition strategy standpoint on the EPS recapitalization program, we're, where we're taking our U.S.-built payloads built by Northrop Grumman here in Redondo, and we're hosting them on a Space Norway commercially selected satellite bus. That's still TBD on which exact bus we'll get. We're in that process right now. But one of the things we've been able to do is leverage their commercial practices to move faster, to have a much more aggressive launch date than we would have otherwise. But we've also facilitated a great partnership with our Norwegian partners, such that we're able to be involved in the process of looking at the spacecraft bidders' proposals, and even to the point where we can actually reach back to our payload contractor in Northrop and be able to ask some questions on the technical side to ensure that we're doing things smart, that they'll match up, and ideally to mitigate and limit the integration problems that could arise down the road hosting on a new satellite bus. So everyone, I would just say the partnership that we have both with our Northrop counterparts here on the payload side, as well as with Space Norway, the folks we're working with in Norway, has been a key to the good progress we've made so far.
That's a great answer, too. Heather, I think you said you have a few more questions for us.
Yes, sir. This is probably more directed towards Ms. Pallone, but the HOPS contract, or the Hosted Payload Solution contract, has been available for years now, but hasn't been seen much use. Are any of you looking on leveraging hosted payloads on commercial satellites?
I feel like that was almost a setup. I'm absolutely looking to leverage payload hosting opportunities. One of the things we're trying to bake into the program from the start is really that opportunity, so that when the Space Norways of the world come by, similar to what we've been able to do with the EPS program, we could do with this program too, which is have a payload that's ready for hosting opportunities. I would say we're a little early. I don't have a payload yet to use the HOPS contract for, but that's absolutely something that we're looking for in the future, and looking to create opportunities to take advantage of that in the future.
Anyone else? Okay. Any other questions, Heather?
Yes, sir. How does the reorganization of SMC, i.e. SMC 2.0, affect your programs?
I'll take that one. From a ground perspective, it enables us to better utilize and implement the enterprise ground services concept that we've been directed by our Air Force Space Command Commander, General Raymond, to go and work on. So from a ground perspective, instead of having disparate ground systems for each of the individual constellations, we'll now be working towards more of an enterprise solution for space and for all of the space systems. So the 2.0 solution actually brings us a little bit closer to being able to go down the road of a more enterprise solution for ground.
And I think from a space perspective, I talk with my counterparts in the GPS and the SBIRS program offices quite a bit about the challenges that we all face, or tips and tricks to get your satellite into space. So having SMC 2.0 have a cross-cut structure where that's more built in than just the network that you build among your peers is going to formalize a lot of that, and I think reap some big dividends down the road. I had something else, but I forgot. So
You can always come back.
I think that for the most part, the job I had yesterday is the same job I have today and probably tomorrow. But I used to think when I worked at GPS, we would send a corrosion control team to Diego Garcia to work on our antenna there. And probably as the GPS boat left, the AFSCN boat was showing up right after it. So there's, to me, the new structure allows for taking advantage of opportunities like that we probably didn't look at as much in the past when we were in our individual program stovepipes. So on the sustainment end of the business, we are talking about how do we take advantage of opportunities like that where we're doing really common activities, for example, like corrosion control on antennas, and see if we can get some synergy of effort and therefore save some dollars there to do something else, because there's always more work to be done than resources, and if we can do things more efficiently, I think that's a good thing. So for the most part, that same job needs to be done, but I think it's how we open up the aperture and think from more of an enterprise level versus our individual programs.
I would add to that as well. I think the part of SMC 2.0 that I find most appealing is it's trying to change the culture of the entire enterprise, and is trying to fit within the culture of the enterprise, both of the DoD, but as well as the space industry, space industrial complex as a whole. But even just within SMC, and I think it goes back to kind of what Jay mentioned earlier with regard to the nexus of where we're at with space acquisition today. And our space acquisition enterprise is kind of has been founded or has developed into a situation up to today where launch is very expensive and we only get one shot to put it up there, right? And so it's got to be perfect. It's got to be 100% mission assurance. We got to put time. It's got to, many tests have to be involved, and we're all very risk adverse. And now we're getting to a point where some of those assumptions have changed, and our geopolitical climate has changed, and so we have to adapt. And so one of the most, if not the most important factor that has to change is the culture of everybody that's involved to say we have to do things differently. And that's what I find most appealing about SMC 2.0. And so, for example, as I met with my new PEO, Colonel Steve Whitney, a couple weeks ago, one of the things that he drilled into his MLs was that he plans on pushing down authority to us to the maximum extent possible. And I think over time, that has risen. It's continued to rise up higher and higher in terms of where the decisions are made. And I think this is a conscious effort to try to push those decisions back down, such that the people on the front line can actually make some decisions again. So that's what I find most appealing about the SMC 2.0 construct.
I guess I'll finish up. To a certain degree, WGS has been inching towards 2.0 over the years anyway. Just looking at our program office, we've basically gone from a kind of a normal, very large program office down to essentially it's a 7-person program office at this point. And we've pushed a lot of the responsibility over the years towards the contractor, both to get the cycle times down on the satellite development and to cut costs. So we've managed over the years to deliver the subsequent WGSs for less unit costs. So, just trying to look for, the cycle times are really what drive kind of the satellite costs. And so just drive those down and, still get the product that you're looking for, but maybe with less, overhead on the overall system. So.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Heather, any more?
Sure. How do you envision using rapid prototyping to let your programs go faster?
I'll take that one. So I'm really hoping to leverage rapid prototyping to go faster. I think we have a really cool opportunity. So, a decade ago when I came into SMC, what I would typically hear is we're not going to do competitive prototyping past maybe an early requirements review because it's expensive and we can't afford to do it. And where we are now, I think we have an opportunity, PTS in particular, to come out and say, what if I assume that that's not a good assumption? What if I challenge that assumption? What if I try competitive prototyping and take it all the way through on orbit? And opportunities like rapid prototyping authorities give us the ability to do that. It gives us the opportunity to keep competition going farther and see how much we can really push boundaries through leveraging competition. And I think that's a really exciting time for the Air Force, and acknowledging that I could get something that isn't the full up operational, I have checked all the boxes of my hundreds of requirements, but what are those most important things? How can I do a proof of concept of that? How can I see how that actually plays? How could I have an opportunity for some residual use for the users if it works well? How can I learn from that? And then how can I grow the program from it? And I think we've got a lot of really great opportunities to learn from that we've been a little too risk averse to try in the past.
Anyone else? All right. Let me just build on what you said there for a second. You talked about 2 prototypes going longer and what that might do for you. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about things. We've typically maybe carried 2 people to a production decision and stopped. But in the natural order of the commercial world, Ford and Chevy are always out there, right? And there's not a point where there isn't a competitor. And they push each other in a very good way so that we continue getting very good products. And then you look about when you do down select sometimes, where those programs go. Not always the way you wanted. So keeping two gives you a hedge also that you'll always have something for the warfighter. And when you're trying to be agile at the same time and maybe pivot, that's another way to introduce new requirements in this prototyping cycle that continues, or production cycle almost, that continues forever. So I do think there's a lot there we should continue to think carefully about. Is it cheaper in the long haul to run it that way than to have a single person that you're sort of with, right?
And that'll be the interesting experiment to play out is,
Right.
do we start to see fiscal benefits from that? Because if we don't, then very quickly, you know, we're always in a cost-constrained environment. You're going to see budgets shrink such that you can't afford to do competition. So can we prove out that that is the fiscally responsible thing to do, and to continue to carry that through and to continue to have options for the warfighter? Or does it grow so unwieldy that goes by the wayside again?
Right. It'll be hard to see because you don't have anything to compare it to what would have happened with one. But at the same time, it's not all fiscal. There is a warfighter element here that you have to outpace those
Absolutely.
bullets, right? And so this gives you two chances to outpace also. And you're not wed to one person who may not be able to deliver on the timelines to outpace. So there's a lot of interesting variables that come about when you relook at procurement while you outpace the threat, if that makes sense. Any other thoughts on that?
I think it also depends on the environment that the government sets up. I mean, if we're asking industry to build to a certain set of requirements through whatever phase we deem is the right endpoint, but they're free to do something completely unique, then how are we really measuring the effectiveness of that at the end, other than against our requirements? But if we set up an environment where we go back to things like commonality or shared interfaces where the government does control certain things, then not only are we vectoring innovation in a direction that we feel is the most valuable, but we're also, you know, challenging industry to innovate and to provide things in a way that we find the most useful. So to go to your automotive analogy, you know, you see Ford and Chevy and some of those companies build cars on the same platform or with each other's engines all the time, and they're innovating in different ways. So what makes me choose, you know, the Toyota version rather than the Subaru version of a car if 90% of it's the same thing? So I think there's some benefits to doing that, but we just have to say, are we going to continue down the path we are to say, at the end of the day, we're going to have two completely different approaches to solving a problem, or is there going to be some sort of overlap, and what are the trade-offs for each approach?
Yeah, I think your ideas on commonality are right too. There's a commonality theme here, but at the same time, we have to have a way that we embrace what will become an ever-changing technical baseline, both from a threat perspective and from an innovation perspective of new technology that an industry person might want to bring in these common interfaces and things and set interfaces that can be shared, enable both in a way that allows us to pivot as we go forward. It's a lot of interesting, you guys are right, it's a very exciting time, I guess. Any other thoughts? I want to ask one more question about SMC 2.0 before we leave it. One of the things that strikes me is, as they've sort of moved the deck chairs around a bit, in the past, within a large program office, you sort of vertically owned everything, and now there's sort of some horizontal lines of a common ground or a BMC2 system, some things like that start to emerge. There'll be much more collaboration that has to be incentivized amongst the group than maybe happened before. Have you thought, some of you touched on incentives for contractors and others incentivizing this cultural change in behavior. Have you thought about how you're going to collaborate and work together across the center in a new way, I guess, under SMC 2.0? And are there incentives in place to require that?
Well, I think
Or encourage that, not require?
I think if we go back to the conversation we were just having of understanding where those interfaces are, understanding where you have to innovate, if you're looking across the enterprise as a whole, if there are pieces of the enterprise that are bringing part of your solution to the table, it allows you to specialize on what your part of the mission is you're bringing to the table without having to worry about how do I bring the entirety of it and reinvent the entirety of it every time. So how do I leverage those a little bit more efficiently? And I think between the portfolio architect that we've stood up and that office, really bringing the program offices together and cross-collaborating and cross-talking a little bit more, making more of those enterprise decisions, as well as breaking into cores like the enterprise core, which can bring launch to the table for everyone. That was already something we did, but really taking that a step further. And what are the common ground services? What are the common infrastructure pieces that we could bring to all the programs that once we get up and running and once we all really understand how to run with this new concept, it really frees us up to think about what are the unique things that I have to worry about instead of worrying about all of the pieces.
Any other thoughts?
Well, go ahead, Jess.
Sorry. I think that the incentive is just strength in numbers, right? As a program manager, we want to be successful. We want to deliver a product that all the users want and need. And to be able to, as opposed to be stovepiped and kind of just doing your own mission area, now we're going to have the opportunity to see the thought processes and the decisions that are being made across the center and to be able to leverage those and collaborate together, whereas before we weren't able to do that. And I think that each of the individual programs will be better for that.
So I'd say, it's really going to take leadership and communication, because today we have similar challenges, for example, on the space command and control system and then the terminal end of the business, which in some cases we haven't done very well. We get things on orbit with new capabilities, and yet we haven't delivered the terminals to exploit that capability. So I think we need to think more about delivering capability versus necessarily delivering the ground, the space, or the terminal. So I think a lot of that's going to have to be done, because you talked about how will we be incentivized to do that. I guess you could put things in people's position descriptions, but at the end of the day, with most things and with most relationships, I think it comes down to leadership and good communications, because I could say, well, my boss is this person now, and that's who writes my report, but the fact of the matter is, we generally all have 4 or 5 different bosses and stakeholders, and I think if we keep what is the mission at the end and what is the capability that we're trying to deliver to the warfighter, we start driving the right behavior, and that it's not just about the one piece I'm involved with, it's about, again, how do we deliver the capability.
Heather?
That was our final question, but the PMs will be available at the MILSATCOM booth in the exhibit hall for the dessert break to answer any further questions. Please.
So I'd just like to thank everyone here today. Like I said when I started, this is quite a distinguished panel. We heard some very thoughtful and mature answers today, some pretty hard questions. And I'm also very proud of the work you've done every day to field truly a wonderful military communication system for the warfighter and the president. You should be all very proud of yourselves and your teams that have done that. So thank you for your work here today, too.
Please welcome Susan Brooks back to the stage to formally thank the panel.